wanted us to have such a center here at Brandeis called German and Europe. Actually, they wanted us to have a center, period, and they wanted us to focus on Germany. But at the time, in 1997, it was really very important for Germany to be viewed as Germany in Europe. And so the center is called Center for German and European Studies. And I'm very happy that you are all here tonight. Our center has hosted what we call Jewish-German dialogue for many years. In fact, from before I was here and before the center existed. And so I was very glad to partner with Misha Vichniac when he approached me with the idea. And Misha should really receive all the credit. He's put an enormous amount of hours into making this happen. He's been a fantastic motor behind it all. I want to also make sure that if you are interested in this type of dialogue and conversation, please make sure to get on our mailing list so that you can come to further events in the future, or you can email cges@brandeis.edu to get added. Misha will be the moderator of tonight's session. He is the founder or co-founder of the Coalition Against Anti-Semitism in Europe, CAASE. Okay, you don't acronym it. A student-led grassroots organization that documents the issue and works alongside its European counterparts, student organizations in Europe. The evening is also co-sponsored by the Brandeis Genesis Institute for Russian Jewry, and its director is here somewhere. Victor. Oh, there you are. Thank you, Victor. With the BGI, we also have a very productive relationship, and it's wonderful to have this event together.
Though Russia is not technically in Europe yet.
Well, yeah. Although Angela Merkel and Putin have, probably had lots and lots of discussions about that. Who knows what's going to happen next? So the organizations involved or behind this event decided that this was an important event to hold at this time because we are concerned about rising levels of anti-Semitism and of violent anti-Semitism in Europe. 77 years ago, on November 9, 1938, the Nazis orchestrated a violent pogrom against Jews in Germany, since then known as the Kristallnacht pogrom, or the Night of Broken Glass. And I know that at least one person here was there when it happened, has personal memories of that. Hundreds of synagogues, Jewish homes and businesses were destroyed that night. Tens of thousands of Jewish men were marched through German cities and humiliated the next day, most of them ending up in local concentration camps where they would only be released upon verification that they would emigrate immediately. Dozens were killed. For German Jews, it marked the realization that their lives were no longer safe in their own country, in their own home country. Although the Nazis had been restricting and attacking Jews ever since 1933, ever since Hitler came to power, Kristallnacht is widely viewed as the beginning of the Holocaust. And therefore we would like to ask you all to join us in a moment of silence to commemorate victims. Thank you. Sometimes silence is more powerful than any words. 77 years after 1938, Europe is again facing unprecedented levels of hatred and violence towards Jews, most visibly earlier this year in the attacks on Charlie Hebdo and a Jewish supermarket in Paris, France. Jews have returned to Germany in record numbers in the last few decades, mainly from Russia, as the little free booklet there describes that you are welcome to take home. Forming a vibrant community, especially in cities like Berlin, Frankfurt, and Munich. But although denying the Holocaust is illegal in Germany and many other European countries today, anti-Semitism is alive and well. Tonight we will hear from three experts on this topic. The first is Leikind, who is the director of the American Jewish Committee here in Boston, previously senior vice president at Hebrew College and a lawyer by training, and who has been very active in helping European groups to work with American groups to counter anti-Semitism. The second panelist is Judith Vichniac, Associate Dean of the Fellowship Program of the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard. She's an expert on Western European politics, specializing in political theory, political sociology, and French politics. And that's, of course, most relevant for this recent development. And the third panelist is David Gurevich. Am I saying it right? Sort of. A postdoctoral fellow at the Ben Zvi Institute. David has worked to combat anti-Semitism on the ground, infiltrating a Parisian anti-Semitic rally in summer 2014 and working closely with British Jewish communities to understand the threat. I'm sure they will help us better understand, all three of them, what is happening, and you will have ample opportunity to raise your own questions in due course. Please help me in welcoming our panel.
Yes. Once again, thank you all. Thank you to the three of you for coming. Thank you, CGS, and thank you, the Brandeis Institute as well. And I'm excited to welcome the three of you to provide our Brandeis community, faculty, staff, administration, with this wonderful opportunity to understand European anti-Semitism to at a better level. It is increasing, as we all know, at an alarming rate, and unfortunately, we're starting to see a similar seeping issue in the United States itself. And let's begin. Okay, now I think before we begin and before we discuss contemporary ways to combat anti-Semitism itself, I think it's best to review not necessarily history, but what's been happening. And one of the how do the three of you, and this is an open question once again for all of you, and feel free to reflect upon each other's as well. How do you see anti-Semitism today as different from the anti-Semitism that existed 40 years ago, or the anti-Semitism developed through the war and after the war?
This is a question just of the historian.
Well, I can only speak about France. French anti-Semitism in the 19th century was really, is it working? Hello? It was really connected to the animosity of the Catholic Church to the Jewish community. And at the end of the 19th century, along with that, there became a more political and racial anti-Semitism that was grafted on top of that. And so Vichy, which is, I don't know, I assume everybody knows that during World War II, the French government, the Third Republic, dissolved itself, and Vichy was the collaborationist government that collaborated with France after France's defeat and signing an armistice with Germany. And what happened during the war, I think, is key to understanding the reactions that we have now. Because in a sense, the French state abandoned the Jewish community. And not only did they abandon, but they helped the Germans to round up Jews. Most of those people that were deported were refugees in France, but also French citizens were sent off to concentration camps. About 78,000 people died in concentration camps from France. So after the war, what's new is the increased numbers of Muslims in France, and so that adds yet another layer to anti-Semitism in France. And the relationship between Jews and Muslims is a long one in France and goes back to North Africa, where Jews lived in Algeria and Tunisia and Morocco, with many of the Arabs who then moved to France. And there's been animosity between the two communities for a very long time. So I don't think you can separate out what's happened from this history. I'll stop there.
So I think it's also important to keep in mind, that when you're talking about anti-Semitism in Europe, Europe's a very big place, and you're talking about a variety of different phenomena. What's happening in Greece, where there's historic anti-Semitism, you're also finding that there is an extremist movement, Golden Dawn, which is neo-Nazi in character. And that's an ideologically driven view, which is very different from what's happening in France, where you have a historic anti-Semitism that comes from North Africa, but it's also infused with anger and frustration about the circumstances of their community of Muslims in France, and anger about what's happening between Israel and the Palestinians, and the demise of Muslim culture, as it seemed. So I think that there are tremendous varieties, and in Germany you have a very different set of circumstances, as I understand it. So I think it's hard to generalize. One has to recognize that rather than looking at one phenomenon, you're looking at a variety of different phenomena that are often country-specific and sometimes region-specific. Yep.
Thank you. I would totally agree with Rob that there is a very big difference between what's going on in Western Europe in comparison to what's going on in Russia. Well, in Russia today, or in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, we see the same pattern of classical anti-Semitism. Jews control the world, Jews control the media, and so on, so on, so on. In Western Europe, we see more concealed anti-Semitism. Some scholars call it new anti-Semitism, in such a way that it's much more difficult to identify. And I'll give you an example. So, if in the past they used to speak about Jews, today mostly they speak about Israel. But when they speak about Israel, what's the information that is left behind? Israel is a Jewish state. And then the local Jews are seen as kind of representative of the same evil. So because it's politically incorrect to speak about Jews do that and that and that, we'll speak about Israel doing that and that and that. And the same messages, the same discourse, the same themes are used in the campaigns, in the rallies, but diverted towards Israel. Now, it comes to, I would say, absurd that is happening right now. Tomorrow there is in Sweden a rally that commemorates the Crystal Night. And the Swedish authorities decided to ban participation of the Jewish organizations from that rally. You ask, so why? The answer is because the rally will be used by people who criticize Israel, name it BDS, but the investment sanctions, name it different Muslim organizations, name it different radical left, who will use the event that commemorates Holocaust in order to show the equivalence between Israel and the Nazis. By the way, according to State Department, this is one of the definitions of the anti-Semitism. So today, Jews are banned for participating in commemorating Holocaust because they are the evil.
So, to follow up on these perceptions of anti-Semitism within society itself, I'd like to ask you, specifically, you, David, a little bit more about your 2 summers ago, you spent in Europe itself, in France and in the UK, and you worked alongside British Jewish communities, I believe, Sussex County specifically, in and around London. Could you please explain a little bit more about what they did, and during the time, I believe this was a heated time for the Jewish communities in the UK and in France and so on, what methods they used to combat anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, or similar rhetoric?
So I must to admit that I didn't spend the summer in London. During the summer I was in Paris for several days and I saw the rally. The connection with the communities in UK from my side was, I would say, I was following their activities because today they have a lot of, I would say, possibilities to check what's going on, to speak with people without being there physically. I was in touch with them for several years, and then when I was in London, I went to meet with them, and I saw something tremendous. You must to understand what is the environment today in Western Europe. And I'll give you one example. Can we see the first slide, please? No, this one? So here are a few head titles from Paris. Unfortunately, in London, it doesn't get so bad as it is in Paris, but we are closer. We are close to that. This is summer 2014. So protesters throw Molotov cocktails into synagogue as illegitimate critics of the policy, of course. Or Jews are assaulted, kids are assaulted in the street, and so on. Now that means that when you are a Jew who lives today in Western Europe, you are in very inconvenient situation. Inconvenient, that is speaking delicately. That means that some people that stand behind the rallies or support the rallies would see you as somebody who is part of this big negative thing. And I'm not speaking about Israelis, I'm speaking about Jews who live in Europe, who have no connection to Israel. And it means that, I'll quote a rabbi from UK, says, listen, it's not a matter whether I'm going to be assaulted or I'm not going to be assaulted. I'm going to be assaulted just because they see that I look as a Jew. And when such kind of events happening, many of the people in the Jewish community try to put their head down, not to make too much noise. Because that's, first of all, it's dangerous. Then it's, of course, intimidating. And Jews for, I think, Professor Vichniac can agree, for centuries, Jews had this response that, listen, just wait, it will pass, it will not do anything. Now, the impressive thing about what people in Brighton did, Brighton, UK, is that they decided not to sit and wait. So the story is that one of the members of the community was passing on the street and saw that there was a big rally outside the shop of the company called Soda Street. That is an Israeli company that produces very nice soda machines. And that rally was about this company as human rights violators, murderers, and so on, so on, so on. And he decided he is not going to wait. He didn't know about this company anything. He checked on the internet. But then he called several friends and said, listen, I'm going to be there tomorrow, or excuse me, next time, they're doing it once in a week on Saturday, and I'm going to stand there as a proud Jew with Israeli flag, and I will do whatever it needs to do that this place is not going to be abandoned. Are you coming with me? And the next Saturday, 5 people appeared there in front of that shop, standing outside this rally of BDS with Israeli flags, singing Hava Nagila, singing other songs in Hebrew. And the people of BDS were surprised because they were used to the fact that they can do whatever they want and there is no response. Now, when Simon Kopp, that's the name of the guy who started the idea, started to do that weekly, he accompanied it with big scale Facebook coverage. You can see their page, Sunset Friends of Israel. Each week, they would post what happened on the rallies, what they were doing. They were interviewing people, they were speaking with people, they were making mock of the different BDS protesters. And that coverage on Facebook created something amazing. Because suddenly, a lot of people in Brighton and around Brighton, they were sitting in their houses and thinking that they should do something, suddenly saw that, well, they don't have to be alone in order to join this issue. They can come together. And these demonstrations became a mobilizing power. Suddenly, people started to travel to Brighton from London, which is 2.5 hours travel, and participate in these demonstrations. And people came from other parts. So basically, that enterprise became not only something about standing against BDS, but a uniting power of the community. Suddenly, people can come together and be proud Jews without putting their heads down. And that was amazing.
One small question before we follow up. Do you believe this was, this community standing up, do you believe this was simply just Jews, or do you believe this was Jews and allies? Was this simply a community of the Jewish community, or their supporters as well?
Misha, thank you for your question, because I must mention that from the beginning, there were few people that joined this community that are not Jews. People who saw that this is the right cause and that this should not be happening. So because of the Facebook coverage, more and more people came. And of course, for Jews, it's important because it's something about self-identity. But for other people, it's important because they stand for the right cause.
Thank you. In some senses, Charlie Hebdo is one of the. Once again, it wasn't the first. It wasn't in vacuum at all. But it was one of the big profile events that raised awareness, that showed this issue on the world scale, with the kosher supermarket and the murder of the 4 Jews, unfortunately. I'm wondering if we're beginning to see these types of, within French society, within the AJC framework, in the political realm. This is, once again, speaking largely of Western Europe. But do you feel like this is beginning to come up? Do you believe that there's more support and more action being taken by Western European communities, AJC Boston, AJC Paris, London, Berlin, and French society? So
I'm not in Europe. I'm here in Boston. So my comments are based on what I've learned from other people. But what I understand is that in principle, European governments, France and Germany, my colleagues indicate they've been slow to respond to the phenomenon, which is not the same as saying it's indifferent or that people don't care necessarily, but that in France and in Germany, until there have been a series of murders that have happened, there have been a series of desecrations of synagogues, threats, and the government didn't really mobilize until Charlie Hebdo. In Germany, what my colleagues there have reported is something quite similar. Again, in Germany, there's a tremendous amount of resources that are put into supporting the Jewish community. The Jewish community is thriving in Germany, it's growing. So you don't have a situation there where people are feeling as if they're at risk. In fact, the 20,000 Jews, Israelis, living in Germany. Nevertheless, there is a phenomenon increasingly developing there where many Jews are feeling more and more isolated. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, was asked to speak at a rally against anti-Semitism. There were about estimated 6,000, some people say 8,000 people that showed up. Most of them were Jews. The issue of anti-Semitism has not become a primary issue. There hasn't been a central coordinated response to anti-Semitism in Germany. There have been many responses. There's been a blue ribbon panel that was organized in Germany, as I understand it, but unfortunately initially had no Jewish members. There was a lot of complaints made about it. That has been changed. There are conferences that have been set up. So it's not that nothing is happening, but the Parliament, the Bundestag, my understanding, the EU Parliament itself have not taken concerted, organized action. Germany is going to become the head of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe next year, and my understanding that there's a debated definition of anti-Semitism that Germany will champion, or says they will right now that they'll champion, which includes the definition of anti-Semitism, including anti-Semitism that's hiding behind anti-Zionism. Very controversial, lots of critique from the left, lots of critique from the Muslim community, but that is the beginning of activity that's developing here. So I think in France it's a very different situation, and you may want to speak to that more, but where you have people who feel very isolated. Anecdotally, I have family in France with cousins with young children. And the question they're asking themselves is there a future here if when we go to synagogue, there have to be soldiers outside? That's different than saying that all French people are anti-Semitic. You have a problem that has its principal genesis, as I understand it, coming from the Muslim community there, and some left-wing, extreme left, and some extreme right. What you have more is, excluding Prime Minister Valls, a sense of this isn't a priority for people. After Charlie Hebdo, you had 3 million people marching through the streets of Paris. The marker Je suis juif was out there, but it wasn't really to be seen. It wasn't popular. People see that. It makes them wonder whether they belong and what the future is going to bring.
Before you hand over the microphone to Judith, I was wondering, at more of a not so much large governmental level, on the municipal level, this initiative, the AGC initiative, Mayors Against Anti-Semitism, and if you don't know, the initiative that was started here, Mayors Against Anti-Semitism, it's a statement that has garnered the signature of, correct me if I'm wrong, over 360 mayors, including many mayors of large American cities like New York, Bill de Blasio, Mayor Washer Boston, the Mayor of LA, Rahm Emanuel of Chicago, and has recently garnered the signature of Anne Hidalgo of Paris. And I believe this is a big statement. Do you see this further developing into other cities as well, or do you hold to the issue that this isn't so much of a priority?
So just by way of background, much of the American Jewish community has been alarmed, as I think many of you may be, by what they've heard about what's happening in Europe. It's very difficult to understand. And there was a conversation I had locally here with the mayor of Newton, Seti Warren, who basically said, how can I help? And I said, well, I'll tell you how you can help. You can help us get mayors all across America to suggest that anti-Semitism is a core concern. We can then reach out to mayors in Europe to join that process. The initiative exceeded way beyond what we ever imagined. The number, I think, now is about 305 mayors representing 80 million Americans who signed on to this letter. It started in Europe now, and it started with the mayor of Paris, and I believe the mayor of Vilnius signed on recently. The difficulty for those of us who think that anti-Semitism is emerging as a serious and complicated but serious concern is that the refugee crisis is washing away focus on issues like this and many other issues as well. But for Jews, the refugee crisis evokes even greater concern. Because the question is you have Muslim populations that are hostile to Jews. Is that a phenomenon that's going to become worse? I'm not making predictions about that. I'm simply saying it's a concern that's emerging, and I think in many ways an understandable one. Whether it's an accurate one, we'll see.
Well, I have a sort of slightly different take in that, you could, from the headlines in the United States press, one gets the sense that it's the 1930s in France, and it isn't. It really, really is not. Most French Jews, and I know lots, and I have a family there and friends, they go about their business. The only places where there are flashpoints are where there are large Muslim communities and Jewish communities. So Sarcelles, which is this suburb, France, Paris, it's interesting. The rich people live in the city and the poor people live around in what are called the banlieue, or the suburbs, in these big housing developments. And the bottom line is that North African Jews and North African Muslims came together and lived in a lot of these communities. And it's almost become impossible for this to continue because of the rising anti-Semitism. But if you move back to Paris and you live in the 8th or the 15th or the 16th or even the 1st, you go about your life and you're concerned about anti-Semitism. If you send your kids to Jewish schools, yes, there's police outside synagogues, and it doesn't make you feel great, but it is not the 1930s, and I think we have to keep this in mind. I think we have to keep it in perspective. And so I can't speak to Germany, I can't speak to Eastern Europe, I can only speak to France. Now, the demographics are against the Jewish community. I don't know if you realize that Jews are less than 1% of the population. In France, you don't count people by ethnicity. It comes out of Vichy, of the experience of the war, because the French don't want to make ethnic categories an important part of their culture. So they don't count. So you don't even know how many Jews are, and you don't even know how many Muslims. But roughly, they say there are 500,000 Jews, and there's somewhere between 6 to 10 million Muslims. Now, that demographic is very worrisome for the Jewish community, because eventually, there's this famous novel that's just been published called Submission, and the end of that, in the novel, the government is, the elected government is a Muslim government that institutes Sharia law in Paris. And, that's a concern. The demographics are against the community. But a lot of people feel very committed to creating a democratic space in Europe and to have a Jewish presence in Europe, and I don't think they're going to abandon it so easily. But I see things slightly differently.
Well, so I maybe yes, maybe no. I wasn't trying to suggest that we're talking about 1930s or 38. I don't think that's, I agree with you. I don't think it's anything emerging. I think you have a set of complex circumstances. I would say this. Most Jews in France are assimilated. They're people who are not identified